Welcome to this explainer. Today, we are unpacking an incredibly fascinating narrative that bridges the cutting-edge world of real astrophysics with ancient theological linguistics. We're looking at a story that takes data straight from the freezing vacuum of space and runs it through a totally different lens. It's this wild space where hard science and ancient texts literally collide to propose a wildly imaginative theory about our solar system.
Okay, let's dive right into this because this question sits at the absolute core of the mystery we're exploring today. When you look at the solar wind hitting a planet, what are you actually seeing? Are you just looking at a stream of dead, charged particles blasted out by the sun? Or are you witnessing a literal cosmic pollinator, like a force actively seeding the planets with the raw ingredients for life?
Section 1. Solar wind and cosmic fertilization. Let's meet the two minds at the absolute center of this debate.
On one side, we have Dr. Hamza Mumud. He's a plasma astrophysicist, but he's deeply driven by ancient texts. He believes the solar wind actually acts as a lawake, which is an ancient Arabic term for a fertilizing wind. Now, on the exact opposite side sits Dr. Robert Stevenson, who is a staunch, hardline materialist. To Robert, the solar wind is absolutely nothing more than the random thermal expansion of the sun's corona. No cosmic pollination, no grand design. Just heat and expanding gas. But before we look at their experiments, we really need to understand what they're actually measuring out there. They're looking at Alfvén waves. These are flows of charged plasma particles combined with magnetic field oscillations emitted from the sun. Think of them almost like magnetic ripples traveling through the plasma of deep space. This exact phenomenon is the beating heart of Hamza's bold theory. Section 2. Sound and form of plasma waves. So how do you prove a magnetic space ripple is actually a cosmic fertilizer? Well, you have to turn theory into hard data. To do that, Hamza turns his attention to Mars. He analyzes real-world data from the MAVEN satellites, and the data reveals something incredible. The solar wind's Alfvén waves, which vibrate at roughly 0.01 Hz, are actively crashing into Mars's decaying atmosphere. And because Mars has this super weak magnetic field, these waves create what's called a standing oscillation. In plain terms, the solar wind is rhythmically knocking on the door of the Martian atmosphere. Now, Robert dismisses this as just normal pressure modulation, but Hamza, he takes it a massive step further. Hamza takes the polarization pattern of those magnetic ripples and runs them through a plasma sonification algorithm. Basically, he shifts the space waves into frequencies the human ear can actually hear. And the result? It wasn't just random static, no way. It was this rhythmic, deep, seed-scattering sound that miraculously mirrored the exact phonetic structure of the ancient Arabic word la-waki. The long pull of the L, the spin of the W, the burst of the Q, the breath of the H. He even plotted this into a 3D hologram, visually mapping the peaks and valleys of the solar wind directly to the ancient word for fertilizer.
Section 3. Artificial versus natural solar wind. Now, as you can probably guess, Dr. Robert Stevenson is not going to just sit back and accept that space weather is speaking ancient Arabic. He sets out to completely debunk Hamza. Robert builds an artificial plasma gun in his lab. He perfectly mimics the synthetic solar wind's speed at 400 kilometers per second and its density at 5 particles per cubic centimeter. Spot on. But when he sonifies the synthetic wind, nothing. It's just random white noise. No phonetic structure at all. Hamza points out exactly why the experiment failed. Robert copied the particles, sure, but he completely failed to copy the space-time twist, the natural magnetic helicity that's inherent in real, naturally occurring Alfvén waves.
So the crucial point here is, the natural space-time twist of the Alfvén waves matched the linguistic rotation of the word lawaki with 99.9% accuracy. It wasn't just the physical particles that mattered. It was the specific, spiraling geometric shape of the magnetic field traveling all the way from the sun.
Section 4. Creation of water vapor on Mars. But, sonification is just sound and shape. If the solar wind is truly a fertilizer, what exactly is the fruit of this cosmic pollination?
This brings us to the absolutely most explosive discovery in the entire narrative. Hamza digs deeply into the Martian atmosphere and discovers a literal trigger equation. When the charged particles from the solar wind crash into the carbon dioxide ions of Mars and mix with solar radiation, a massive chemical reaction occurs. The result? The actual creation of H2O, water vapor. Guys, the solar wind is literally seeding the Martian atmosphere with water. Robert, being the skeptic, checks this data himself. He runs it across 5 different Martian seasons,
totally expecting to prove Hamza wrong, but the data holds up perfectly every single time. The water production flawlessly correlates with the plasma waves, and this leads to Robert's dramatic, paradigm-shifting realization. He stares at the data and has to admit that the solar wind is triggering a water-making process, behaving precisely as a fertilizing wind.
And the narrative adds one more mind-bending detail here. When they map out the energy transfer of these colliding atoms into a 3D visual structure, the hologram syncs perfectly with the electron density of the Martian atmosphere. But even more astonishing, its phonetic envelope matches the Arabic term fa'askai nakumuhu, which literally translates to giving water to drink. The solar wind doesn't just bring the seed, it actively initiates the irrigation.
Section 5. Mars's inability to retain atmosphere. Now you might be wondering, if the solar wind is constantly seeding Mars with water vapor, why is it still a dead, dry, red planet?
This is where scientific reality introduces a deeply tragic element to our story, and this brilliantly illustrates the irony of Mars. On one side, you have this immense solar wind potential, bringing tremendous kinetic and magnetic energy to create these water seeds. But on the exact opposite side, you have Mars's retention capacity. Mars has a severely decayed magnetosphere and super weak gravity. It simply cannot hold on to the water that the solar wind works so hard to create.
Robert tests this retention data across 3 different planets. Earth and Venus both show high retention capabilities, but Mars, it exhibits a severely decayed retention pattern. In the ancient text, right after mentioning the fertilizing wind and the water, it says, "And you are not its retainers." Using the specific word chazinin, Mars is literally, physically incapable of holding on to the cosmic water seed.
This is the moment Robert fully breaks down. I mean, think about it. This lifelong materialist physicist is just overwhelmed by the undeniable harmony between his hard, empirical retention data and the ancient concept of chazin. He realizes that the fate of Mars was dictated by its planetary inability to hold the very gift the solar wind was constantly providing.
Section 6. The Al-Hijr Terraforming Project. So what do humanity's brightest minds do with a revelation this massive?
Well, they attempt to change the fate of the planet. This leads us to the absolute climax of the explainer. At the International Plasma Astrophysics Conference, Hamza steps onto the global stage. He presents overlapping graphs showing the spiraling alpha wave polarization placed directly over the audio envelope of the ancient verses, and they match perfectly. He provides undeniable proof to the entire scientific community that this polarization creates water, firmly establishing the solar wind as a true cosmic seed. And in this stunning moment of humility, Dr. Robert Stevenson takes the stage to publicly admit his 30-year misunderstanding of solar plasma.
This massive announcement launches the Al-Hijr Solar Wind Terraforming Project. Hamza's lab begins working on a wildly futuristic plan. Step 1. Harness that specific magnetic helicity, that exact space-time twist of the alpha waves. Step 2. Build a massive artificial magnetosphere right around Mars to compensate for its weak gravity. And Step 3. Finally transform the red planet into a true retainer, a world capable of holding the cosmic water seed and actually keeping the water it generates.
In the final chapter of a book Hamza is writing, in the story, he perfectly summarizes the philosophical core of this entire journey. He writes, "When you look at the red surface of Mars, don't just see dryness, see the cosmic pollinator. It is such a powerful reminder that there is profound, active physics happening out there in the dark, constantly interacting with these barren worlds." Which leaves us with this final thought. The narrative proposes a delicate balance, a mizan, between the raw data of planetary physics, the soaring ambition of terraforming, and a much deeper cosmic awareness. So as we look to the stars and the future of space exploration, will we find the physical and philosophical balance required to actually retain this cosmic water? Or will we merely measure the velocity of the plasma and entirely forget the incredible mechanics of the source? That is the question I want you to take away from this explainer today. Thanks for joining me on this one.